Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, June 2nd, 2022. House Judiciary Committee holding a marathon session on a package of bills the Democratic majority says will prevent gun violence, but their approach rejected by and large by committee Republicans who say the changes would not stop the mass shootings that happened in the past couple of weeks and would undermine the constitutional right to keep and bear arms. We'll hear from the committee leadership and talk with NBC Congressional reporter Scott Wong about the House approach and a bipartisan Senate negotiation happening on gun bills, maybe showing promise of a compromise. Plus, President Joe Biden giving a primetime address on the mass shootings. Education Department canceling nearly $6 billion in student loan debt for over 500,000 former students of the for-profit Corinthian Colleges, which has since gone out of business after charges of overpromising their graduates would be getting good jobs. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg meeting with President Biden at the White House discussed helping Ukraine fight off Russia's invasion. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the annual International Religious Freedom Report, criticizing abuses of certain countries by name, including Burma, Saudi Arabia, China, and Afghanistan. And Platinum Jubilee festivities begin in Great Britain for Queen Elizabeth II's 70 years on the throne. From TheHill.com, House Judiciary Committee Chair Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, sought to preempt Republican arguments against new firearm legislation on Thursday, countering claims that video games or a lack of mental health care are driving the gun violence epidemic in the U.S. Nadler's comments came as his panel marked up a package of gun bills in the wake of two mass shootings in Buffalo, New York and Uvalde, Texas, that killed a combined 31 people, including 10 Black Americans and 19 elementary school students. The package lawmakers marked up Thursday includes measures to raise the age to buy semi-automatic rifles to 21, prohibit gun trafficking, require that all guns are traceable, mandate that gun owners store their firearms safely, close the bump stock loophole, and place restrictions on high-capacity magazines. That reporting from The Hill. Here's part of Chairman Nadler's remarks, followed by the opening statement of the Judiciary Committee ranking Republican, Jim Jordan of Ohio.
Because we know from experience that few events expose the emptiness of the gun lobby's rhetoric, like the mass murder of school children, allow me to rebut some of my Republican colleagues' arguments in advance. Nobody seriously believes that Hollywood or video games are to blame for the epidemic of gun violence in America. Our children watch the same movies and play the same games as children in Canada and England and Japan. But only in the United States do we ask the parents of elementary school children to stand in line so we can match their DNA to the remains of their children, because only the United States is awash in 400 million guns. You say that these deaths were caused by a lack of mental health care? I agree that we need to do more for those in our communities who may be in crisis. And I hope that you will join me the next time we are asked to fund such initiatives. I expect that many of my Republican colleagues will not. But I note again that other countries have people who are just as sick Americans, and that those countries do not experience the gun violence that we do here. You say it's too soon to take action, that we are politicizing these tragedies to enact new policies? It has been 23 years since Columbine, 15 years since Virginia Tech, 10 years since Sandy Hook, 7 years since Charleston, 4 years since Parkland and Santa Fe and the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. It has been 3 years since El Paso. It has been a week since we learned again that gun violence can reach any of our children and grandchildren at any time, and that no number of armed guards can guarantee their safety. It has not even been 24 hours since the last mass shooting, and who knows how long until the next one. Too soon? My friends, what the hell are you waiting for? You say that none of the solutions proposed here will stop gun violence in America? Well, there, sadly, I agree. This bill will not alone save every life we will lose to gun violence this year, but it will save some. It might have saved those children in Uvalde, and whoever saves one life, it's as if he saved the entire world. The American people are begging for us to address this crisis. Let us not wait 1 second longer. I urge my colleagues to support the Protecting Our Kids Act, and I yield back. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, life is precious, especially the lives of children. What happened in Uvalde, Texas is tragic. It is every family's worst nightmare. Our hearts go out to the Uvalde community and especially to the families who've lost loved ones last week in this evil act of violence. And of course, there's what happened yesterday in Tulsa and a few weeks ago in Buffalo, and our hearts go out to those families as well. No one wants another tragedy. No one wants this to happen again. That's why it's regretful that Democrats have rushed to a markup today in what seems more like political theater than a real attempt at improving public safety or finding solutions. The Democrats never once reached out to us to seek our input on the legislation we are considering here today. Protecting children is not a Republican or Democrat issue. The Democrats cobbled together a package of measures. This is not a real attempt, in my judgment, to find solutions. Everyone here knows the reality. Democrats are in control of the House. Anything that you and Speaker Pelosi want to pass, you can pass. And frankly, you've already passed numerous bills related to firearms this Congress. But because those bills are radical attempts to legislate away Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, the Senate has not taken up the legislation, just like it won't take up this bill. What we are doing here is just designed to appeal to Democratic primary voters. The bill won't make our schools safer. It will hamper the rights of law-abiding citizens, and it will do nothing to stop mass shootings. We need to get serious about understanding why this keeps happening. Democrats are always fixated on curtailing the rights of law-abiding citizens rather than trying to understand why this evil happens. Until we figure out the why, we will always mourn losses without fixing the problem. Our job is to figure out the why. The bill that Democrats are putting forward today does not help us to understand what's really driving some young men to commit these heinous acts. The bill before us is short-sighted and not solutions-oriented. It's a one-size-fits-all approach that punishes law-abiding citizens while doing nothing to make our communities safer. We all want to keep children safe in school, but this bill wouldn't do that. This bill is just another Democrat attack on the Second Amendment, and it's likely just the start. President Biden has said he wants to ban all 9mm handguns. Where does it end? The American people expect and deserve more from us than political charades that rehash old ideas and don't actually solve the underlying problems. Mr. Chairman, we should do better than this. I yield back and look forward to the debate on the legislation.
Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, and before that, the chair of the committee, Gerald Nadler, Democrat of New York. With more on Congress's consideration of gun legislation, we're joined by Scott Wong, NBC News senior congressional reporter. Thanks for being here. Seems like there are different approaches happening in the House and Senate. We've been covering the House Judiciary Committee markup. What's been happening there?
Well, thanks for having me. We have seen quite a bit of activity on Capitol Hill. As you know, Congress is out this week for the Memorial Day recess, but behind the scenes and today actually in front of the camera, there is some movement. The House Judiciary Committee is holding an emergency meeting to respond to the mass shootings that we've seen most recently in Uvalde, Texas, involving those 19 students and 2 teachers. And what Jerry Nadler, the chairman, has decided to do is press forward with a package of bills aimed at preventing gun violence. This is an emergency package. It involves raising the age for people to purchase semi-automatic rifles from 18 to 21. It makes it a federal offense to import, sell, possess high-capacity magazines. It stiffens penalties for gun trafficking and straw purchases, among other things. The Democrats' argument in this hearing has been, what are we here for in Congress if not to save lives and prevent, especially children, from being slaughtered in these mass shootings. I think there's a real sense in the country that Americans are looking to their national leaders for some leadership. There's been an impasse on Capitol Hill for the last 10 years, ever since Sandy Hook. And so we have not seen any movement. They've come close in the past, but have not come to any sort of agreement. Republicans, for their part, led by Jim Jordan, the ranking member of Judiciary, are saying this is all an effort by Democrats in an election year to take away American Second Amendment rights. So they're being pretty consistent on that point, trying to appeal to gun owners and conservatives. And so that's sort of where things stand on the House side of things.
Over to the Senate, you report that a bipartisan group of senators negotiating may be making some progress towards a compromise.
It does feel that way. Yesterday marked the second day of virtual meetings. Remember, these senators are on break, so they're back in their respective states, but they are talking, continuing to talk every day. And they held a meeting with this sort of group of 9 bipartisan senators. Some of the folks I'll just rattle off: Chris Murphy and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Those are some of the Democrats. On the Republican side, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. Those are some of the Republicans who met on this Zoom call yesterday. What they are saying is they are making progress. They believe that, according to a source familiar with these talks, that there is a, quote, framework for a legislative bill. Some of the items we've heard in the recent days that they are taking a look at include expanding background checks. That's something that Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin focused on in the wake of Sandy Hook 10 years ago. Secondly, red flag laws. This would allow states to confiscate weapons from people who are found to be a threat to themselves or to others. They're not looking at a national red flag law. They're looking at incentives through grants for states to pass red flag laws. Finally, in this sort of third bucket is mental health resources and more money for school security. These are two areas that Republicans, and specifically Mitch McConnell, mentioned yesterday when he was out in Kentucky talking to reporters. These are two areas that Republicans feel strongly about would be good responses for this raft of gun violence that we've seen throughout the country in recent years. And so the group is continuing to meet. They have until the end of the Memorial Day recess, heading into early next week, to come to some sort of agreement. They say they're close, but we've been in this position before, and there's a lot of skepticism on Capitol Hill about whether or not they will be able to come to some sort of bipartisan consensus.
We're talking with Scott Wong, NBC News senior congressional reporter. President Biden came out strongly in favor of doing something after the recent mass shootings. Is there any sense from the White House how closely he's been involved in or following the negotiations on Capitol Hill?
Given the high-profile nature of these shootings that we've seen, first in Buffalo, New York, with the targeting of African-American shoppers there that left 10 dead. Secondly, in Uvalde, Texas, with the elementary school shooting. And then most recently last night at a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that left 4 people dead. The president has been following these issues and has been briefed on these events very closely. In fact, he did personally make visits to Buffalo to pay respects to the families of the victims there, as well as in Uvalde, Texas. What the president has said is he wants action from Congress. The president himself is calling for a reinstatement of the ban on assault weapons. That seems to be out of reach for this United States Senate, where you need, of course, as you know, 60 votes. That means at least 10 Republicans to join Democrats in passing whatever gun solution they come up with. That's not going to happen in this United States Senate. The Republicans simply will not join in Democrats in that effort. And so what this bipartisan group is doing is playing small ball. They're taking incremental steps. They're taking lessons that they learned in the wake of the Sandy Hook failure under President Obama, where Joe Biden was, in fact, tasked with leading that effort and trying to bring the two parties together in the wake of Sandy Hook. That fell 6 votes short, the Manchin-Toomey resolution back then 10 years ago. And so these are all people who have been involved in these talks before. They're taking the lessons learned from Sandy Hook, as well as some of the other tragic shootings that we've seen over the years, and they're trying to apply that and come to some sort of agreement.
Scott Wong, NBC News senior congressional reporter. Find his work at NBC.com and on Twitter at ScottWongDC. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One more note about the House. The Judiciary Committee Chair, Gerald Nadler, telling reporters that one gun bill that will be approved by the committee, an assault weapons ban, will go to a full House vote next week only if it is determined there are enough yes votes in the full House to pass it. President Biden giving a primetime speech to the nation on the mass shootings and the response. Vice President Kamala Harris mentioning that as she spoke today about yesterday's mass shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Before I begin my comments, I do want to, however, speak for a moment about what happened yesterday in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The president will be talking more about this later. But we have been monitoring the situation quite closely. And the latest report, of course, is that 4 innocent people lost their lives and many more were injured. We, of course, all of us hold the people of Tulsa in our hearts, but we also reaffirm our commitment to passing common sense gun safety laws. And I don't have to tell anybody in this room, but President Biden has taken more executive action to combat gun violence than any other president at this point in their administration. But we cannot, as an administration, or those of us who are here, address this alone. No more excuses. Thoughts and prayers are important, but not enough. We need Congress to act. And so with that, I will turn to the topic at hand, but I know that we all feel similarly about the importance of leaders leading on issues like this.
Vice President Kamala Harris, police chief in Tulsa, Oklahoma, saying the suspect who shot and killed 4 people at a hospital in that city yesterday targeted his doctor, who he felt had not given him adequate care for pain after back surgery, and that he shot anyone in his way getting to that doctor. Police say the firearms used were bought legally, a semi-automatic handgun and a semi-automatic AR-15 rifle. This is Washington Today. Vice President Kamala Harris made her remarks at the Education Department in Washington, D.C. at the start of a speech on a different subject. An announcement that all outstanding federal student loan debt owed by former students of Corinthian Colleges is being discharged. 560,000 borrowers, a total of $5.8 billion in loan cancellations. Vice President saying Corinthian was guilty of fraud.
I first became involved, as many of you know, in the fight to stop Corinthian nearly a decade ago. As Attorney General of California, I led the California Department of Justice, and we sued Corinthian. And we won, because our investigation discovered that Corinthian had engaged in false and deceptive advertising. They promoted programs that they did not offer. They penalized their telemarketers if the telemarketers revealed the truth to prospective students. Their ads falsely promised students that if they attended certain programs, they would be guaranteed a job after graduation, raising the hopes of people who worked so hard for the bit of money they had to pay to get in these programs. Our investigation revealed that some of the degrees from Corinthian were so worthless that they didn't help a single student get a job. Moreover, the company went through great lengths to inflate its job placement numbers to mislead prospective students. For example, in 2011, they paid a temporary employment agency to hire graduates for short-term jobs. Some students told us they were placed in jobs that only lasted for 2 days. 2 days. That, of course, is not gainful employment. But Corinthian counted it as a successful job placement. Fraud. We also learned that the company deliberately targeted specific populations of people, such as veterans, single mothers, and single fathers, people living below the poverty line, people who lost jobs during the Great Recession, people who believed in the power of education to transform their lives, people who simply wanted to take control of their own future.
Vice President Kamala Harris at the Education Department. For-profit Corinthian Colleges Incorporated was founded in 1995, and it ended operations in 2015. At its high point, it had over 110,000 students at 100 campuses across the country. Former students with loans do not need to do anything to have them discharged. The Education Department will be notifying them. Forgiveness does not apply to borrowers who have already fully repaid their loans. President Biden is said to be considering wider student loan forgiveness. A figure of $10,000 per student is being mentioned in various media reports. White House says nothing has been decided yet. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 435, NASDAQ up 322, S&P up 75. Labor Department says applications for unemployment benefits fell last week by 11,000 to 200,000. Total number of Americans collecting the jobless benefits, 1.3 million, the fewest since 1969. Treasury and Labor Department saying the Social Security Trust Fund will be able to continue to pay out benefits until 2034. That's 1 year later than estimated in last year's report. And for Medicare Part A, that will remain fully financed through 2028, 2 years beyond what was previously projected. From CNBC, the White House expects COVID vaccinations for children under age 5 to begin as early as June 21st. Dr. Ashish Jha, the White House COVID-19 response coordinator, said the Biden administration will initially make 10 million doses of Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines available to states, pharmacies, and community health centers. States can begin placing orders on Friday, Jha said, but the vaccine doses will ship only after the Food and Drug Administration authorizes the shots.
So as you all know, the FDA is currently working through a rigorous and independent scientific process. As part of that, the FDA's advisory committee, VRBPAC, will be meeting on June 14th and 15th. They will review the data submitted by Pfizer and Moderna for their vaccines, and we expect an FDA decision shortly after the advisory committee meeting. And we look forward to this process playing out. Now, as you all know, because we've been through this many times, the FDA authorization is not the final step in the process. Before vaccinations can begin, CDC must also issue its recommendations. If the FDA authorizes the vaccines, the CDC will have its advisory committee meetings, and ultimately the CDC director will make her recommendations. And we expect the CDC to make its dates for its advisory committee meetings public very, very soon.
Dr. Ashish Jha in the White House briefing room. After his opening statement, a reporter asking him about the COVID vaccine approval process for children under 5, a process that for some has caused great frustration.
So I think you are well aware about how much frustration and anger there's been from parents of young children. The fact we were talking about second boosters for much of the population before even this first one was available. I'm a parent of a 4-year-old who got COVID while we sat around waiting for this. And I think one point in all of that really is frustrating, raises a lot of questions for parents, is why the FDA didn't move to hold hearing right away after Moderna applied, why it waited for Pfizer and Moderna. Can you just explain the thinking behind that delay?
So, first of all, I have a 10-year-old, so he's been able to get vaccinated, but I have a lot of friends who have kids under 5. So let me just say I feel the frustration. I certainly hear the frustration. Two things. First of all, the FDA makes these decisions on timelines really based on its ability to review the data, to do a careful analysis. And that's what they've been doing. I think they've done that throughout the entire pandemic. If you look at from the early days of the early adult vaccines through this one, they have moved expeditiously. And they have made the determinations of when they can be ready to evaluate and when they can make a decision. The specifics of it, you're going to have to, I think, ultimately talk to the FDA, but I feel like they have moved very quickly to try to consume and analyze a very large tranche of data from Moderna. And look, at the end of the day, we all want to move fast, but we want to get it right. And that has got to be priority number one, and that's what I think the FDA has been focused on.
Dr. Ashish Jha, White House COVID-19 response coordinator in the White House briefing room. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Sunday on In Depth, journalist Sam Quinones will be our guest to talk about immigration issues and the drug epidemic in the United States. He's the author of several books, including True Tales from Another Mexico, Dreamland, and most recently, The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth, about the neuroscience of addiction and the deadly impact of synthetic drugs. Join in the conversation with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets for Sam Quinones on In Depth, Sunday, live at noon Eastern on Book TV, on C-SPAN 2. And before the program, visit cspanshop.org to get your copies of Sam Quinones' books.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. Some headlines from the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying Russia is now controlling about 20% of Ukraine's territory, over 48,000 square miles, and the military front line extends for over 600 miles. Zelensky speaking today to the Parliament of Luxembourg. Biden administration reportedly planning to sell armed drones that can carry Hellfire missiles to Ukraine. That comes out of Reuters. And Great Britain pledging to send sophisticated medium-range rocket systems to Ukraine, joining the U.S. and Germany in providing advanced systems to shoot down aircraft and also disable artillery. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg meeting with President Biden at the White House today to discuss the war in Ukraine. That meeting was private, but Stoltenberg came out to the White House driveway to speak with reporters.
I just finished a great meeting with President Biden, with Vice President Harris, and also with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. I commended the United States for their real and great leadership, both in providing support to Ukraine, but also the leadership they demonstrate every day in support of our transatlantic alliance. President Putin wanted less NATO, and therefore he invaded Ukraine, but he is getting more NATO, with more NATO presence in the eastern part of the alliance, and also with more members. And the decision by Finland and Sweden to apply for NATO membership, they are historic decisions, and Finland and Sweden as NATO members will strengthen NATO, strengthen our transatlantic bond. We also discussed the preparations for the upcoming NATO summit in Madrid, which will be a summit that takes place at a pivotal time for our security, where we will make sure that NATO continue to adapt to a more competitive world with strategic competition, and where we see the impact on our security from authoritarian powers like Russia and China, and also the need for NATO to work together, to stand together, and to ensure that we further strengthen the bond between North America and Europe in NATO. So I'm looking forward to welcoming President Biden to our summit in Madrid in a few weeks' time.
Can you give us a sense right now, as far as NATO is concerned, what is your best assessment of the end game in the war in Ukraine, both in terms of how it will end and also the timeline?
Wars are by nature unpredictable, and therefore we just have to be prepared for the long haul, because what we see is that this war has now become a war of attrition, where the Ukrainians are paying a high price for defending their own country on the battlefield, but also where we see that Russia is taking high casualties. Our responsibility is to provide support to Ukraine, Most wars, and also most likely this war, will at some stage end at the negotiating table. But what we know is that what happens around the negotiating table is very closely linked to the situation on the ground, on the battlefield. So we need to help them, to support them, so they can achieve the best possible outcome of this conflict.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in the White House driveway. This from Sky News. U.S. military hackers have conducted offensive operations in support of Ukraine. The head of U.S. Cyber Command has told Sky News. In an exclusive interview, General Paul Nakasone also explained how separate hunt-forward operations were allowing the U.S. to search out foreign hackers and identify their tools before they were used against America. The four-star general did not detail the activities, but explained how they were lawful, conducted with complete civilian oversight of the military, and through policy decided at the Department of Defense. That reporting from Sky News. The White House National Cyber Director Chris Inglis was asked about it today at a program in Washington, D.C., hosted by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Sean Lingus with CNN. Thanks for doing this. Chris, I wanted to get your response. As you know, General Nakasone this week confirmed the Cyber Command has taken the full spectrum operations in support of Ukraine. I'm wondering a couple things. First of all, have you all seen any response from Russia in cyberspace to that activity? And more broadly, are you concerned at all that the Russians might see, rightly or wrongly, those activities as escalatory, given we've seen everyone and their mother participate in cyber operations in Ukraine? There's been hacktivists, there's been people using U.S. infrastructure that might be opens up the door to misattribution. What's being done to make sure that isn't misinterpreted? Thanks.
Yeah, I can't speak to any Russian reaction associated with those remarks, or for that matter, any operations that may or may not be taking place in cyberspace. But let me address what General Nakasone said. The White House affirmed those remarks, I think, as recently as yesterday, in saying he's correct in what he said, which was not in any way, shape, or form breathless. It was just a statement of fact. And the statement of fact was that cyber is an instrument of power, and to the degree that we're applying many instruments of power to assist in the defense of Ukraine, cyber is one of those instruments of power, used from our perspective in a defensive kind of modality, meaning that while they might impose effects or have kind of might make a difference to the receiving end of that, whether it's financial sanctions, whether it's lethal material applied kind of in military ways across the Ukraine, what we're trying to do is to assist the defense of the Ukrainian people, right? And I think that cyber then, as an instrument of power, can and should play a role in that. That's what I heard Paul Nakasone say, and I haven't heard anything that from that day forward, a couple of days ago, would say that that's been provocative. Most people that I think understand the nature of this domain have said that makes sense. Anything less than that wouldn't.
White House National Cyber Director Chris Inglis at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Burma, Eritrea, Saudi Arabia, China, Afghanistan, some of the countries singled out by Secretary of State Antony Blinken at today's release of the 2021 International Religious Freedom Report. State Department says the report describes the status of religious freedom, government policies violating religious belief and practices of groups, religious denominations, and individuals, and U.S. policies promoting religious freedom in nearly every country and territory throughout the world.
In many parts of the world, governments are failing to respect their citizens' basic rights. Some governments continue to use blasphemy and apostasy laws, which ban defamation and renunciation of religion, to police the language of religious minorities. Others curtail expressions of religious belief, like restrictions on religious attire. And all societies, including our own and across Europe, must do more to combat rising forms of hate, including anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim sentiment. To highlight a few examples, in March, based on extensive legal review of the evidence, I made the determination that Burma's military had committed genocide and crimes against humanity with the intent to destroy predominantly Muslim Rohingya in 2017, intent that was evidenced by, among other things, attacks on mosques, the use of religious and ethnic slurs, the desecration of Qurans, among, again, many other actions. In Eritrea, only 4 religious groups are permitted to practice their faith freely, while members of other religious minority groups have been detained, arrested, forced to renounce their faith as a precondition for their release. In Saudi Arabia, we recognize the important recent moves to increase interfaith dialogue and religious tolerance. However, publicly practicing any faith other than Islam remains illegal, and the government continues to discriminate against members of religious minority communities. China continues its genocide and repression of predominantly Muslim Uyghurs and other religious minority groups. Since April 2017, more than 1 million Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and others have been detained in internment camps in Xinjiang. PRC continues to harass adherents of other religions that it deems out of line with Chinese Communist Party doctrine, including by destroying Buddhist, Christian, Islamic, and Taoist houses of worship, and by erecting barriers to employment and housing for Christians, Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, and Falun Gong practitioners. In Afghanistan, conditions for religious freedom have deteriorated dramatically under the Taliban, particularly as they crack down on the basic rights of women and girls to get an education, to work, to engage in society, often under the banner of religion. Meanwhile, ISIS-K is conducting increasingly violent attacks against religious minorities, particularly Shia Hazaras. In Pakistan, at least 16 individuals accused of blasphemy were sentenced to death by Pakistani courts in 2021, though none of these sentences has yet to be carried out.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the State Department. Also there, Rashad Hussain, U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, who reviewed some themes in the report issued today.
I'd like to lay out 3 key themes in the report. First, too many governments use discriminatory laws and policies and abuse their own people. We have seen 2 genocides of religious minority communities in recent years, in China and in Burma. Second, rising societal intolerance and hatred are fueling violence and conflict around the world. Governments must not sit silent or stand idly by in the face of such oppression. Third, powerful collaboration among civil society, governments, and multilateral partners has led to some progress and provides hope in addressing these complex challenges.
Rashad Hussain, U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Today's International Religious Freedom Report from the State Department covers 2021. The annual report has been required since Congress passed a law in 1998. From London, reporting in the New York Times, with regimented lines of Scots and Irish Guards, throngs of Union Jack-clad onlookers, and waves of aircraft streaking overhead, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated 70 years on the throne on Thursday, earning tributes from world leaders and ordinary people for a reign unmatched in British history. Shortly before 1 p.m., the Queen stepped out onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace to greet a sea of well-wishers stretching down the mall. She was among 4 generations of the royal family, a tableau that captured both the monarchy's timeless durability and a modern family's internal stresses. Today begins 4 days of celebration for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. British Parliament is in recess this week, but the Prime Minister Boris Johnson made his statement of tribute last week.
And it is not so much what she has done as the way she has done it. Getting the best out of people, inspiring them to serve others and to serve their communities, helping to create that invisible thread of pride and allegiance that tugs on all our hearts and makes us happy to serve, or at least to do something for our country in the way that she serves this country. And I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Prime Ministers are not supposed to relay their conversations with the Queen, and I will not, except to say that her knowledge and understanding of politics and world affairs is profound. And there have been times, I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman knows whereof he speaks, there have been times when I've been scrabbling to remember a historical date or the name of some African capital, and she's got there first. And when it comes to some subjects, anything equestrian, I'm simply nowhere. And I bet I speak for every Prime Minister who has ever had an audience with Her Majesty when I say that our conversations are always immensely comforting, because she has seen the sweep of it. And she has seen the cycle from gloom to elation. And every time, her country, under her, has gone forward from strength to strength. She has seen an empire transformed into a happy commonwealth that countries are now bidding to join. And in the 1,000-year history of this place, no monarch has seen such an increase in the longevity or the prosperity or the opportunity or the freedom of the British people. No monarch has seen such technical advances, many of which British scientists have played a leading part, from the dawn of the internet to the use of the world's first approved COVID vaccine. No monarch, by her efforts and dedication and achievement, better deserves the attribute of greatness. And for me, she is already Elizabeth the Great.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the House of Commons in London, May 26th, in anticipation of today, which begins the national celebration in the United Kingdom for the Queen's 70-year reign, the Platinum Jubilee. This morning, President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden posting their well wishes.
Your Majesty, congratulations on your Platinum Jubilee. For 70 years, you've inspired people with your selfless devotion and service to the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. And throughout your reign, the relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States has grown stronger and closer than ever.
Throughout the years, the joy your visits to the United States have brought Americans and your solidarity with the American people in times of tragedy have deepened the friendship and profound connection between our countries. And Joe and I were so touched by the generosity and welcome you showed to us when we visited you at Windsor Castle last year during our first visit overseas as President and First Lady.
On behalf of the people of the United States, we send you our best wishes to you and the people around the world marking this momentous and historic occasion.
Congratulations, Your Majesty, and have a wonderful Platinum Jubilee celebration.
President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden in a posted video. Queen Elizabeth II is 96 years old and has been experiencing some health issues. The Royal Palace says the Queen greatly enjoyed the military parade today, but did experience some discomfort and has decided to skip the Thanksgiving service on Friday, one of the major events of her Platinum Jubilee. Thank you for listening to Washington Today. Get more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day with C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls, live, on the air, on the news of the day. And we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Friday morning, we'll discuss congressional efforts to address gun violence with the president of the Independent Firearm Owners Association and former NRA lobbyist Richard Feldman. Also, Lawrence Yun, chief economist for the National Association of Realtors, talks about the state of the nation's housing and rental markets and trends to watch out for. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Friday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.